So today we're going to go over a couple of the techniques you can use with pen and ink, or with your microns if that's what you have, or even with a ballpoint pen if that's what you have, in order to create some depth and texture in your paintings. So I'm working with a pen, stylus, and nibs and India ink. So I'm going to swatch a couple different nibs here. The first one is a small calligraphy nib. You can tell because it has that little extra piece on top and a flat round bottom. Those write really smoothly and keep a more consistent line weight versus these, which are like just the pointed ones. They don't have that piece on top, and you create line weight more with pressure or by using the side of the pen. And then this one's like a really small, sharp one that behaves much like the last one. So I'm gonna use that middle sharp one. I don't tend to use the calligraphy nibs very often. You can see you can get some nice pressure just by lifting and up and down, and you kind of have to get used to them because if you press too hard, the nib will separate. But the first technique we're going to look at is called a contour line. So it's sort of like running a parallel line, but you're allowing the space in between the lines. The farther apart they are, the more light the color comes across as. The closer, more dense the line work is, the deeper your tones. So that's how we're creating shading. And with a contour line, you're sort of following around whatever you're doing. So in this case, we're sort of playing it, making this into a sphere. You can use it to follow around the folds of fabric, around the shape of an arm, but you're emphasizing the depth of the whatever you're doing the study of by creating it with the line, and still letting it get denser in places that you want to shadow and spread out, and breaking up the line and allowing more of the paper to show through in areas that you want it to be a highlight or a light area. You can see as you get the lines closer and closer together, they will eventually make almost a flat black. So next we're going to work on is cross-hatching. You all know what this is. If you do it really controlled, then it makes those perfect little squares. You can kind of combine it with a contour line where they're kind of swooping lines, and then you cross-hatch in an arch, which can be nice for rounded objects. It can be very neat like this, or it can kind of get more chaotic as you spread out from it. Make kind of a combination of the two. On this side we're being a little more controlled again, and then I'll make a little more of an organic crosshatch on the, other side and through the middle. So it just depends on how you want to work and what you're portraying, if a more controlled crosshatch or a more organic one works for your subject. So next thing we're going to look at is stippling, which is just making little dots instead of line work. This is really handy in things that just need a little extra texture added to them. I've used it to portray wool, or if you do spend a lot of time building it up, it can feel very velvety and like dense and deep, so it can be a really nice technique to add in. It's a little time consuming, but it's the same general idea, right? The denser the dots are, the darker the shade is. I want to do an example with it in micron too, because the nice thing with using a micron is you can use bigger nibs to make the deeper dots. So this one is a 0.08, and then I'm going to switch it out for a 0.05 to do as we fade out. So that makes it a little more mathematical. And I'm going to work on sort of this crisscross lines. I use this sometimes to portray fur. If you're doing like a fur stole or something on an animal, sometimes it's nice for hair. Sometimes it's nice to just really quickly get some shading down. It's a less controlled version. You're doing short little lines that overlap at the beginning and end, and you're not really too worried about keeping them perfectly parallel, but you'll see I'm kind of gathering them into a point, so you can use the line in the same way you'd use them and contour lines to kind of shape something, to go around it, to create the sense of fur wrapping around something. And then if you wanted to darken an area, like I'm working in here, you just go back over it with short strokes and sort of build it up. This creates a really nice organic texture. And you can keep building until you get pure black in areas, until it's really, really deep, or you can leave it a little bit more in your midtones. Now all of these are being done on clean white paper, right? So the idea would be I could go over this with watercolor as long as my ink is waterproof. Very important, make sure your ink is waterproof. I do a little test of it on whatever paper you're thinking about using. Like do a layer of ink, make sure you let it dry all the way down, and then do a pretty wet wash over it, and you'll be able to see if it's gonna hold its shape even when you add water over it. So next thing we're gonna work on is this kind of squibbly line. This is great for foliage, anything that has like a really organic texture, things that need to feel dense and less planned. Sometimes it's great for hair, really curly hair. So this one I use a lot of pressure. I'm also going to switch out nibs. So I switched to the calligraphy nib because when doing the coils of squibbles, it sort of can be difficult with the sharper edges. They kind of keep getting caught and sometimes they'll like spray. So switching to the calligraphy nib helps me just do it faster with a smoother line. But like we talked about, that nib has a really controlled weight of the line. So I'll probably switch into a sharper one to do the finishing touches. So there's our little sharp nib, and it'll help me create some more midtones and things. All of these techniques work exactly the same if they're in a micron or in something else, you know. So we're gonna do sort of a wavy line. These, we've sort of looked at what this might look like when we were doing some wood grain, so you can use it for something similar to wood grain. So that's what this side of this circle is. I'm gonna bop over to the other side and show you kind of how you can use it as a contour also. So if you follow it as it turns around a corner, I often do like all the lines going down one direction, lines going over, and just sort of connect them in the middle, but you can see it creates a really nice like edge as it wraps around that. This is really helpful if you want to do a lot of ink work in like a face or something. This is a great way to create that feeling of 3D as it comes around the nose bridge or building up a nostril, something that maybe doesn't necessarily have a huge shadow to it, but does have a very definite like change of plane. Now, our last one over here is a parallel line. It is exactly what it sounds like. The only thing I'd say is that think about using breaks in your line, kind of hop skips. You'll see that I do that a lot to keep it from looking too regular. So in areas you want it to be lighter, instead of only using the width in between the lines, also lean into allowing your line to create air and light within the line itself. But those are a bunch of techniques you can use. We'll have another video following this of actually using them in a painting.